The first thing you need to understand is this. I didn't buy that cabin to cause trouble. I bought it to disappear. No badge, no gun, no briefings. Just pine trees, cold air, and the kind of silence that hums so loud it forces your thoughts to slow down. After 22 years with the FBI, most of them in places I can't name, chasing people who don't exist on paper, I wanted something simple. A place where my biggest concern was whether the firewood was dry enough to burn. That peace lasted exactly 9 days. On the 10th morning, I was drinking black coffee on the porch when a black and white cruiser rolled up the gravel drive like it owned the place. Lights off, slow, deliberate, the kind of approach cops use when they expect resistance or drama. And sitting smugly on the passenger side of a beige Lexus behind it was her, clipboard clutched to her chest, sunglasses too big for her face. That tight, satisfied smile of someone who couldn't wait to say, "I told you so." The HOA Karen. She didn't know my name. She didn't know my job. And she definitely didn't know that her husband, the same man she bragged about nonstop at HOA meetings, answered directly to me every single day at FBI headquarters. All she knew was that I had a cabin that didn't match her precious neighborhood aesthetic. So she called the cops. What happened next is a reason that woman avoids eye contact with me to this day, and why her husband nearly resigned on the spot. The cabin sat just outside the official boundary of the Pine Ridge Estates community, technically private land. No shared roads, no shared utilities, no shared authority. I checked every line twice before signing the deed. But HOAs have a funny way of expanding their jurisdiction, especially when someone doesn't play along. I'd already had 3 run-ins with Karen. The first was the day I unloaded my truck. She marched up my driveway without introducing herself, heels sinking into the dirt like it personally offended her. "Excuse me," she said, peering at my stacked firewood. "Those logs can't be visible from the road." I took a slow sip of water. Good thing they aren't. She pursed her lips. Pine Ridge Estates has regulations. I don't live in Pine Ridge Estates. She smiled like a shark. "We'll see." The second run-in was about my flagpole. No flag yet, just a pole. Apparently the idea of a flag offended her. The third was about the sound of my generator at 6 p.m. on a Saturday. By the fourth complaint, she skipped talking to me altogether. That's when she called the police. The officer who stepped out of the cruiser was young, early 30s, professional, but cautious. He rested his hand near his belt, not threatening, just habit. "Morning, sir," he said. "We received a call about an unpermitted structure and possible code violations." Karen stood behind him, nodding enthusiastically. I raised an eyebrow. "From the HOA?" "Yes, sir." I smiled, not because it was funny, but because I already knew how this would end. "Mind if I see the complaint?" Karen stepped forward. "It's extensive," she said. "And frankly, I'm shocked this place was allowed to operate at all." Operate? Like I was running a meth lab instead of a one-room cabin with solar panels. The officer skimmed the paperwork, then looked back at me. "Do you have identification, sir?" "Of course." I handed him my driver's license. He glanced at it, then frowned slightly, looked again. His posture shifted, just a hair. "You recently moved in." 10 days ago." "And your occupation?" he asked, routine but curious. Karen leaned in, clearly waiting to hear freelancer or unemployed. I met her gaze. "Assistant Special Agent in charge," I said calmly. "Federal Bureau of Investigation." Silence. The officer froze. Karen laughed. "Oh, that's rich." The officer swallowed. "So, do you have federal credentials?" I reached into my jacket and handed him my badge. The color drained from Karen's face so fast I thought she might faint. And that's when she said the 4 words she would regret forever. "My husband works for the FBI." I nodded slowly. "Yes," I said, "he does. And I'm his boss." Most people, when confronted with undeniable reality, do the sensible thing. They retreat. Karen was not most people. Her face had gone pale. Sure, but then something else happened. That tight, frozen smile returned. The kind people use when their ego is cornered and retreat feels worse than humiliation. That doesn't change anything. she said sharply. Rules are rules. The officer cleared his throat. This is private property, Karen interrupted, and this structure violates multiple HOA covenants. I leaned against the porch railing, arms crossed. Which covenants would those be? She flipped through her clipboard like a game show contestant desperate for the right answer. Exterior materials, setback requirements, noise ordinances, visual pollution. Visual pollution, I repeated. Yes, she said triumphantly. Those solar panels are an eyesore. The officer shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable. He looked from Karen to me, then back again. From what I can see, this property isn't under HOA jurisdiction. Karen's head snapped toward him. That's not what the map says. She pulled out a laminated printout, dated, faded, and conveniently zoomed in just enough to be misleading. I sighed. Officer, I said, may I show you something? He nodded gratefully. I walked inside and returned with a folder, property survey, county records, permits, and a very official-looking boundary map. All stamped. All current. He reviewed it carefully. This land is outside the HOA boundary by almost half a mile, he said finally. Karen's nails dug into the clipboard. Well then, she said, forcing a laugh, the county must have made a mistake. The officer raised an eyebrow. These are county records. Karen exhaled sharply. Fine. Then we'll escalate. That word, escalate, told me everything I needed to know about her. She turned to me. You may think you're above the rules because of your job, but Pine Ridge Estates has attorneys. Very good ones. I smiled politely. I'm sure they do. She scoffed. My husband will hear about this. That might be awkward, I said. She stiffened. Why is that? Because I'll probably be the one telling him. The officer coughed into his fist to hide a grin. Karen turned on him. Are you going to do something or not? He straightened. There's no violation here. No citation will be issued. Her eyes narrowed. Then I want a report filed. That's already being done. She crossed her arms. Good, because this isn't over. With that, she marched back to her Lexus, heels crunching gravel like gunshots. The officer lingered. I'm sorry about that, sir, he said quietly. We get a lot of calls like this. I nodded. You handled it well. He hesitated. One more thing. You said you're an ASAC. Yes. He swallowed. My brother's in Quantico. Small world. He smiled. Have a good day, sir. When they left, the forest returned to silence, but it felt thinner now, like the calm before a storm. 2 hours later, my phone rang. The caller ID made me chuckle. Mark I answered. Mark. There was a long pause. Sir, he said carefully, I just got a very emotional call from my wife. I imagine you did. She says you threatened her. I corrected her. Another pause. She says you embarrassed her in front of the police. She did that herself. He exhaled slowly. So, she also said you claimed to be her husband's superior. I didn't claim it. More silence. Mark, I continued, how long have we worked together? 8 years, he said quietly. And in those 8 years, have I ever lied to you? No, sir. Then I suggest you come talk to your wife before this gets worse. His voice dropped. She's already called the HOA board. Of course she did. I figured. I said, Mark, I'm giving you professional courtesy here. Yes, sir. Handle this. Yes, sir. The line went dead. That evening, I attended my first and last HOA board meeting. I didn't plan to go, but curiosity is a professional weakness. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, all polished wood and fake plants. About 20 residents sat in folding chairs, whispering. Karen sat front and center. When I walked in, the room went quiet. She didn't look at me. The board president, a man with a voice like damp cardboard, cleared his throat. We'll now address the matter of the unauthorized cabin. Karen shot me a smug glance. I raised my hand. Point of clarification. The president sighed. Sir, please state your name. I did. And your address? I gave it. He frowned. That address isn't within Pine Ridge Estates. Correct. Murmurs rippled through the room. Karen stood. His lying. I smiled. I'm really not. I placed copies of my land survey on the table, one by one. Enough for everyone. The president adjusted his glasses. This appears legitimate. Karen's face reddened. That doesn't matter. His generator violates noise regulations. Another board member chimed in. Those only apply within the HOA. Karen slammed her hand on the table. Then we'll annex him. The room went silent. I tilted my head. You can't annex private land. We'll try, she snapped. That's when the door opened. Mark walked in. He looked exhausted. Karen toned. Tell them. He didn't look at her. He looked at me. Sir, he said, voice tight. May I speak? The president nodded. Mark turned to the room. My wife was mistaken. This property is not under HOA authority. There are no violations, and this matter should be dropped immediately. Karen stared at him. What are you doing? He finally looked at her. Preventing you from ruining my career. Gasps. The president cleared his throat. Well, that seemed conclusive. Karen shook her head. You're all against me. Mark leaned closer to her. No, reality is. I stood. If there's nothing further. Karen's voice cracked. This isn't over. I met her eyes. It is. And for the first time, she believed me. I thought the HOA board meeting would put an end to Karen's theatrics. I was wrong. By the next morning, I found a small envelope pinned to my cabin door. Plain white. No return address. Inside was a notice from the County Code Enforcement Office. Someone, clearly Karen, had reported unpermitted structures and potential safety violations. I stared at it for a long time, swirling the black coffee in my cup. I'd done everything by the book. Permits, land surveys, environmental impact reports. Every I dotted, every T crossed. Yet here it was. I knew exactly who was behind it. And more importantly, I knew how to handle it. 2 inspectors arrived mid-morning. Official vests, clipboards, and the kind of eager professionalism that says, I'm just following orders. Please don't make me feel stupid. Good morning, sir, the taller one said. We're here regarding a complaint about unpermitted construction. I waved them in. I assume you've seen the county records already. They exchanged a nervous glance. We'll need to review your documents. I handed over the folder I had prepared months ago, land survey, building permits, electrical inspections, and a copy of the environmental assessment. The taller inspector leafed through them, his pen hovering over the checklist. Everything appears to be in order, he said finally. Permits are valid, setbacks comply, and there's no code violation. The second inspector added, We'd like to inspect the cabin for safety. Standard procedure. Of course, I said. Fireplace, wiring, plumbing. Go ahead. They moved through the cabin, whispering to each other, jotting notes. I watched from the porch, sipping my coffee, feeling like I was watching a slow-motion disaster movie, except I was the one holding the remote. By the time they stepped outside, their demeanor had shifted. No longer the eager young inspectors ready to punish a minor code violation. They were cautious, deferential. Everything seemed compliant, the taller one said, almost apologetically. I nodded. Thank you for doing your job thoroughly. They left quietly, filing their report electronically, which meant Karen would soon get a copy. I knew how she'd react. I could almost hear the screeching in her head. Karen's retaliation didn't stop there. The next day, Mark called me at the cabin. Sir, she's going to HR, he said, voice tight. She filed a complaint against me. Said I'm not enforcing ethical boundaries at work. I laughed, though quietly, so he wouldn't hear over the phone. She doesn't know how bureaucracy works, does she? Apparently not. She's dragging the whole office into this. Mark, I said, Document everything. Dates, emails, meetings. Do not respond emotionally. Let me handle the optics. He exhaled. You make it sound easy. It will be, I said, because you have nothing to hide, and she's about to dig herself a hole so deep she won't climb out of it. Meanwhile, Karen escalated to her final, desperate maneuver, attempting to involve the county zoning board directly. She submitted another complaint claiming the cabin's visual intrusion was decreasing property values in the HOA. I received an official-looking email CC'd to the zoning board, the county assessor, and even the local news tip line. I leaned back in my chair, steepled my fingers, and grinned. She didn't realize this, but I had spent decades training for exactly this kind of situation. Handling bureaucratic aggression, countering power plays, neutralizing threats without firing a single shot, that was my specialty. I drafted a formal response. It included maps showing my property boundaries, documentation proving all structures were fully permitted, a brief, professional note on HOA overreach, carefully worded so it couldn't be misinterpreted as harassment. I sent it directly to the county board, the assessor, and a copy to Karen, because she needed to witness the humiliation firsthand. 2 days later, the response came back from the county. After reviewing the complaint and accompanying documentation, the county finds the property is in full compliance. No further action will be taken. I poured another coffee. I could almost hear her shriek through cyberspace. But Karen doesn't accept defeat gracefully. That evening, she came to my driveway again, this time in tennis shoes, waving her arms like a conductor orchestrating chaos. "Neighbors," she shouted, "did you know there's a man living here legally? His flouting rules. Something must be done." The neighborhood, by now, had started peeking out their windows. Some were curious. Others were openly laughing. Karen's credibility was eroding faster than wet sand at high tide. I stepped out onto the porch. "Good evening, Karen. Nice night for a walk." She froze. Her voice trembled, though she tried to cover it with authority. "You have no right to speak to me that way." "I have every right," I said calmly. "But I also have every right to record your actions, for my safety and the county's records." Her eyes darted to her phone. "You—" I held up a hand. "Relax. I'm not going to post anything. But the county and the HOA board will have the full context if this continues." The look on her face, that mix of fury and panic, priceless. Later, Mark called again. "She tried to drag me further at work," he said. "HR told me to ignore personal grievances and focus on documented responsibilities. They see through it. Sir, she's risking everything." "Exactly," I said. "She already lost the HOA. Now she's losing her influence everywhere. Eventually, she'll realize she's fighting a war she can't win." And I thought back to why I chose that cabin. Not just for solitude. Not just for peace. I chose it because it was outside the lines, away from petty rules, away from people who confuse authority with morality, and, secretly, because I knew that if someone tried to challenge me there, it would become a lesson they'd never forget. Karen was learning that lesson, slowly, painfully, publicly. By the end of the week, the HOA meeting stopped. The county stopped sending inspectors. The zoning complaints went unanswered, but Karen wasn't done. She still lurked around the edges, plotting her next move, desperate to reclaim some shred of power. I knew it was only a matter of time before she escalated again. But for now, the forest had returned to its deep, almost sacred silence. And I smiled because I knew she had no idea who she was really messing with. I should have known Karen wouldn't let it die quietly. By midweek, a thick envelope arrived at my cabin, stamped in glaring red, summons, civil court. She had escalated to litigation. The complaint was almost laughable if it weren't serious. Unpermitted residence, nuisance, violation of community aesthetic standards, devaluation of surrounding property. I read it twice, then laugh quietly, the kind of laugh that comes when you know the opponent is about to make a spectacular mistake. Karen had no idea what she was dealing with. The courtroom was a small, unassuming chamber in the county courthouse. Sunlight filtered through tall windows, dust motes dancing lazily. She arrived early, dressed in the same beige ensemble she wore to HOA meetings, armed with a stack of folders and what looked like a binder full of printed HOA emails. I walked in a few minutes later, calm as if I was strolling into my living room. No suit, just a well-fitted jacket over a t-shirt. The kind of casual confidence that says, "I've seen chaos far worse than you." She saw me and froze. Not with fear, yet, but with the fury of someone who had already lost before the first round had started. Her husband, Mark, sat in the back row, looking extremely uncomfortable. I could tell he wanted to run, but HR protocols and my reputation had already cornered him into watching. The judge called the court to order. Karen jumped in immediately, her voice high-pitched with indignation. "This man," she began, pointing directly at me, "has built a residence that is completely outside the HOA rules. It's unsightly, disruptive, and completely unacceptable. I demand the court force him to remove it." I stood, calm, measured. "Your Honor, the property in question is outside the jurisdiction of the HOA, fully permitted by the county, and compliant with all relevant building codes. I have all supporting documentation here." I laid the folder on the desk. The judge raised an eyebrow, flipping through permits, surveys, and photographs. "This appears comprehensive," he muttered. Karen gasped. "But—" The judge raised a hand. "Ms. Thornton," her name, of course, "your complaint is outside the scope of this court because the HOA has no authority over this property. The county has confirmed all permits are valid. Case dismissed." The words hit Karen like a physical blow. I swear I could hear her ego shatter somewhere between her ears. Her jaw tightened. This isn't fair." The judge leaned forward. "Life isn't fair. Laws are fair. And in this case, they favor the property owner." Karen didn't leave quietly. She began muttering about appeals, county bribery, and this is just the beginning. But her husband, finally fully awake to the nightmare she created, stood up. "Karen," he said quietly but firmly, "this is insane. You've dragged everyone into this for no reason, and now you've embarrassed yourself publicly. Enough." Karen turned on him. "You're supposed to back me up." "I back the truth," he said, "which is that you've caused enough damage. I'm done participating." The courtroom felt heavy with tension. Karen blinked rapidly, realizing that for the first time, she had zero allies. Not in the HOA, not in her household, not even in the courtroom. After the court session, I stepped outside to breathe in the crisp forest air. I could feel the weight of the conflict starting to lift. The legal system, as messy and frustrating as it can be, had cleared the path. But Karen's obsession wasn't gone. It had mutated. This wasn't about rules anymore. It was about control. Mark caught up to me as I walked back to the cabin. "Sir," he said quietly, almost breathless, "I can't thank you enough. You've saved my career and my sanity." I smiled. "You've done your job, Mark." She just forgot how to recognize authority. He laughed nervously. "I think she'll keep trying. Though, she's unhinged." "You're right," I said, "which is why we're going to neutralize her once and for all. Legally, permanently, and creatively." That evening, I set my plan in motion. Step 1, documentation. Every interaction, email, complaint, and HOA violation was cataloged. Step 2, public exposure. I carefully drafted a polite but firm letter to the HOA board detailing Karen's repeated violations, false claims, an attempt to overreach authority. Step 3, leverage. Her husband's professional standing was gently referenced, reminding everyone involved that she was trying to drag him into professional conflicts with false claims. I also placed strategically timed friendly reminders with the county. Inspections were complete, everything compliant, her complaints officially dismissed. Copies went to the HOA, the local board, and, naturally, Karen herself. The effect was immediate. Within days, the HOA stopped sending emails. County inspectors stopped visiting. Her internal credibility was evaporating faster than a puddle in the summer sun. Karen tried one last desperate move. She approached my neighbor, a sweet woman named Mrs. Dalloway, hoping to rally support. "I can't believe this," Karen said, voice shaking with anger. "Is flaunting rules, and the county and HOA are doing nothing. You have to help me." Mrs. Dalloway blinked. "Karen, he's outside the HOA boundaries. He has permits. He's perfectly legal. You've lost." Karen's face twisted with frustration. "No, he can't just get away with this." "You need to stop," Mrs. Dalloway said firmly. "You're embarrassing yourself, and your husband is embarrassed too." I'd set the stage perfectly. The county, the HOA, neighbors, and Mark were all now aligned against her antics. Late that night, I sat on the porch, sipping coffee as the forest exhaled around me. The cabin, my sanctuary, was safe. The legal storm had passed, leaving behind only the quiet hum of pine needles and wind. I knew Karen would continue to fume, but her ability to act had been neutralized. She could yell, she could fume, but she couldn't legally threaten me anymore. And her husband, finally awake to reality, wouldn't let her drag anyone into her chaos again. For the first time since she showed up on my driveway, I could breathe. I smiled, thinking of the absurdity of the situation. A petty HOA queen, thinking she could command a former FBI ASAC. Some people just don't understand the world they're entering until it's too late. Karen learned that lesson painfully, publicly, and permanently. By this point, Karen was desperate. You could practically see the panic etched into her every action. Court losses, HOA dismissals, county inspections, each had chipped away at her authority, and now she had nothing left. But desperation makes people reckless. One bright Saturday, I noticed something odd from the cabin porch. A small crowd had gathered near the edge of the HOA property line. Karen had somehow convinced a few neighbors to stand behind her, holding clipboards, shaking their heads, and whispering about unsightly cabins and illegal structures. I sipped my coffee slowly, letting her believe she had an audience. "Attention!" Karen shouted, her voice cracking like an overblown megaphone. "This cabin is a violation. We will not stand for it. I demand immediate action." The neighbors looked confused, shifting nervously. A few exchanged glances like, "Wait, are we sure about this?" I stepped forward, casually, as if I were taking a morning stroll to check my mail. "Good morning, everyone," I said, my voice calm, warm, controlled, like a teacher speaking to a particularly stubborn child. "I see there's a concern about my cabin." Karen froze. "You can't just..." I raised my hand. "Actually, I can, and legally, I have. The county has verified all permits, and the HOA has no jurisdiction here. Every single complaint you submitted has been reviewed and dismissed." The crowd murmured. One neighbor whispered, "Didn't she just..." Karen's eyes widened. "That's not true. I have emails, documents, proof." I smiled. "Yes, Karen, the same documents you've been submitting. I have copies of every complaint, with dates and timestamps, sent to the county and the HOA board. And I've also sent copies to your husband's office. So any further claims will now have professional consequences." Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. The neighbors laughed quietly. Some shook their heads. The small audience that had once amplified her delusions now seemed to evaporate, leaving her standing alone. And then I did something subtle, but devastating. I pulled out my phone and spoke calmly into it. "Hello, Mark?" "Yes, she's here at the cabin, trying the neighborhood uprising angle again." "Perfect. Thank you." A few minutes later, Mark arrived, walking purposefully across the boundary line. Karen's eyes went wide. "Mark!" she shouted. "This isn't..." He held up a hand. "Karen, this behavior has to stop. Publicly, privately, wherever. Your actions are jeopardizing both our reputations. You need to leave." Karen's face turned red. "You're supposed to." "I'm supposed to back the truth," Mark said firmly, "which is that your campaign against him has been baseless and escalating unnecessarily. End of discussion." The neighbors looked between the two of them, the absurdity of the scene hitting them all at once. Karen's credibility crumbled before their eyes. But I wasn't done. I walked slowly down the steps of my porch, letting the weight of my presence fill the space. "Karen, I said quietly, with a tone that carried across the small group. You've been warned multiple times. You've escalated this through the courts, the HOA, and the county. Every action you've taken has been invalidated. Her eyes darted to her clipboard, then back at me, seeking some angle of attack. There was none. I suggest, I continued, that you step away now for your own sake. Public humiliation is a terrible thing to endure, and yet here you are, standing in the middle of it voluntarily. The laughter from the neighbors was soft at first, then louder, murmurs of she's crazy, and finally, someone told her rippled through the crowd. Karen's composure evaporated completely. Her last line, whispered and defeated, barely audible. You can't humiliate me. I have. Her husband shook his head and guided her toward her car. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, leaving her standing on the edge of the HOA's border, alone, defeated, and exposed. By the time she drove off, the neighborhood was buzzing, but instead of fear of a self-appointed ruler, there was relief. Neighbors came over to the cabin later that day, offering cookies, coffee, and congratulations. It's about time someone told her, Mrs. Dalloway said, shaking her head. I just kept it legal, I said, smiling. Documentation goes a long way, and letting reality do the heavy lifting helps too. They laughed. Some glance at the forest beyond the property line, where my cabin sat quietly, fully compliant and unshakable. That night, Mark called me. She's talking about filing another appeal, he said, sounding exasperated. I think she might be spiraling. I chuckled. Let her? By now, her social credibility is gone, her husband is aligned with reality, and the HOA has already documented every one of her baseless claims. Mark exhaled. You know, sir, I never expected to see someone dismantle her so thoroughly without even raising a finger. That's the advantage of preparation, I said, and knowing your opponent's psychology. Karen can only escalate when she feels powerless. Give her every opportunity to see she's powerless, and she'll do the rest herself. Mark laughed. Brutal. And effective. Yes, I said, and the forest is peaceful again. In the following weeks, Karen disappeared from HOA meetings entirely. Rumor had it she tried to start a campaign in another neighborhood, only to face public resistance almost immediately. Her husband refused to intervene, citing professional consequences. I never received another complaint. No inspectors, no emails, no summonses, just quiet, pine needles, and the kind of peace that comes when every potential threat has been neutralized legally, strategically, and psychologically. From my porch, I could see the sunset spill gold across the treetops. The cabin stood untouched. The forest exhaled its calm, uninterrupted by petty human drama. Karen had tried everything: complaints, inspections, courts, public shaming. Every attempt failed spectacularly because she underestimated one thing. I knew the game, and I played it perfectly. Sometimes you don't need force. Sometimes patience, documentation, and strategy are enough. And sometimes karma just does the rest. By the time winter rolled in, Karen had vanished from the neighborhood entirely. Not quietly. Her departure was dramatic, as if she had decided the world wasn't worth the effort of keeping her reputation intact. Neighbors whispered about her filing a series of lawsuits in distant counties, all of which collapsed under scrutiny almost instantly. The woman who had once dominated HOA meetings with her clipboard and smug grin had been reduced to a cautionary tale. I walked through the snow-covered path to the cabin one morning, my boots crunching over frozen pine needles. The wind cut sharp, but it carried the kind of silence that only exists when chaos has passed and nature reclaims its territory. The cabin looked exactly the way I had left it weeks before, undisturbed, fully compliant, and utterly untouchable. The forest seemed almost to exhale around me. I had always loved this time of year. The quiet, the solitude, the sense that the world slowed down just enough for you to catch your breath. And now, after weeks of legal maneuvers, strategic patience, and careful observation, I could finally breathe too. Mark called that evening. "So," he said, voice lighter than I'd heard in months, "I just wanted to thank you again. You really handled everything perfectly." I smiled, even though he couldn't see it. "Mark, you did your part. You stayed calm, documented everything, and trusted the process. That's all anyone could ask for. I don't know what I would have done without your guidance, he admitted. I thought she'd ruin everything, my career, our reputation, even my personal life. You let reality guide you, I said. Sometimes that's all it takes. The rest? That's just patience and letting people reveal themselves. Mark laughed softly. Revealing herself is an understatement. She humiliated herself worse than anyone could have imagined. Exactly, I said, and now it's done. The cabin is safe. You're safe. And, most importantly, sanity has been restored. I hung up the phone and stepped outside again. The sunset was bleeding orange and purple across the horizon, casting long shadows between the pine trees. My cabin sat in the middle of it all, a fortress of calm against a storm of petty human ambition. I thought back to the day Karen had first appeared, clipboard in hand, smug and self-assured. At the time, I had almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But watching her unravel over the weeks had been instructive. She had underestimated patience, documentation, and subtle strategy, the very tools that had kept her from realizing she was outmatched from the start. Sometimes people mistake confidence for ignorance. Sometimes they mistake authority for weakness. Karen had done both, and she had paid the price. The HOA, now freed from her constant complaints, quietly moved on. A few of the residents even approached me with small gifts, cookies, a bottle of wine, handwritten notes thanking me for restoring peace. I accepted politely, careful to maintain the distance that had always kept this cabin sacred. I wasn't a hero. I didn't want to be. But I was vigilant, and the forest and my legal strategy had protected the sanctuary I had built. One morning, as the first snowflakes began to fall, I saw a familiar figure at the edge of the property. It was Mrs. Dalloway, waving from the road. "Morning," she called. "Thought you might like some fresh bread." I waved back. "You're too kind." She smiled. "Not kind. Smart. You handle that woman brilliantly. I've never seen anyone dismantle her like that before. Patience, documentation, and letting reality speak for itself," I said. She nodded. "Well, whatever you did, it worked. For the first time in years, this neighborhood feels calm, quiet, normal." I smiled. Exactly what I wanted. Even Karen's husband, Mark, seemed to find peace. The tension that had hung over his professional life lifted, and he could finally breathe without fearing that every email complaint would somehow come back to haunt him. A week later, I received a brief, polite email from him. "Thank you again. You handled this perfectly. She's learning the hard way that her behavior has consequences. I've finally gotten her to back off completely. No dramatics, no threats, no lingering tension. Just clarity, resolution, and the kind of relief that comes after weeks of unnecessary stress." I spent the next few days tending to the cabin, chopping firewood, checking the generator, tightening window frames against the winter wind. Every log, every nail, every small task felt like a meditation. The world beyond the forest, the petty conflicts, the HOA politics, the Karen-level chaos, had no place here. This was my domain, my sanctuary. Sitting by the fireplace that evening, I reflected on the ordeal. Some people thrive on conflict. Some people see rules as power. And some people, when confronted with someone who knows the rules better than they do, implode spectacularly. Karen had been all three. But I had stayed calm, stayed legal, and stayed strategic. That was enough. And now, finally, it was over. I poured myself a final cup of coffee and stepped onto the porch. The stars were coming out, one by one, brilliant and clear. The forest stretched endlessly in all directions, and the cabin stood firmly in the center, a testament to patience, precision, and knowing your own power. I smiled quietly. Karen had lost. Mark had learned. The HOA had stabilized, and my cabin, my refuge, remained untouched. In the end, sometimes the most satisfying victories aren't loud or flashy. They're quiet. They're legal, they are strategic, and they leave your adversaries flailing in the chaos they created themselves. As I settled back in the porch chair, sipping the last of my coffee, I realized something important. This cabin wasn't just a getaway. It was a masterclass in controlled chaos, a living lesson in patience and preparation, and a reminder that some battles are won not with force, but with strategy, clarity, and the quiet confidence of someone who has seen it all before. Karen would eventually fade into rumor, a story whispered among neighbors about the woman who challenged a former FBI ASAC and lost spectacularly. And me? I had my peace. The forest hummed around me. The cabin glowed softly in the twilight, and for the first time in weeks, I could simply sit, breathe, and enjoy the silence. The end.